My name's Wiffin, as Liz said. In fact, I love coming to Leicester for lots of reasons. My daughter went to university here. I've done lots of what used to be called serious case reviews and now called the child safeguarding practice reviews here. So I've been a kind of regular visitor here over the years, and there are people here I've met over time, either in person or on screen. And I'm going to talk today really about kind of serious case reviews and local child safeguarding practice reviews and what they're telling us about babies, unborn babies and babies in first year of life, because they are the biggest category of people who come to serious case reviews and local child safeguarding practice reviews, and we really need to be concerned about that. The next category are teenagers, actually, and the care experience population. And we were just having a chat at the table about the amazing tool that's been developed and the kind of interaction, which I'll talk about in a minute, between being care experienced, the vulnerabilities of that becoming a new parent. And somehow we've kind of caught ourselves up in a bit of a kind of circle around that, which would be really nice to somehow resolve. Quick caveat to say about reviews, I'll just call them reviews because that's easier to do, is that they're not about blame, they're about trying to understand and take forward learning. And there's an amazing, so I should say, I'm a social worker by background, I do mostly review work, I did write your neglect, most of your neglect toolkit, so if you're feeling grumpy about it, it's my fault. I've got leave today, so I'll be all right. And I also do some work at the Centre of Expertise on Child Sexual Abuse. And so a lot of my work at the moment seems to be around child sexual abuse. And I just wanted to say, I've just started reading a new book on Cleveland, and which, 30 years on, which I would heartily recommend you. It's a painful read because it's a real challenge. But one of the things Big Campbell says in it is that sort of 30 years ago, that report, for political purposes, kind of started to have this mantra about parents' rights over children's rights. And it sort of took me back a bit to that, which is, why can't we talk about both? Why can't we understand both? And so hear me say that through the presentation. There are times when we have to be absolutely baby-centred, but at the same time understanding the environment, the circumstances of parents, but they're not contradictory. And just to kind of read a book, a speech in the House of Commons 30-something years ago, which kind of said parents' rights are more important than children's rights, just made me think a little bit about where we are. How can I do this? I can't stand behind a lectern because I'm too short. So I suppose the obvious point why we're here is that the first 1,001 days is really, really important, isn't it? That's why we're here, is thinking about this sets the tone for the long-term development of babies into adulthood. And so intervening early is intervening across the life course. Sorry, Liz. Oh, you're in one thing. No, if you don't do it quicker. I think I can't read that actually, so I'll put it up there. But the context is, as I've already said, that huge numbers of under 1-year-olds are subject to child protection plans. They are the largest group who die at the hands of parents or caregivers. We are seeing a huge number of care proceedings for babies under a year and actually peaking at 3 months old, the time for crying actually, when crying's at its most. We're seeing growing numbers of babies being removed from their parents' care at birth. And so the kind of context is that isn't good for anybody. It's not good for the babies, it's not good for the parents, and we just need to think about what we can do about that, what the task is. Thank you. So, we've already heard a bit about child safeguarding, the national panel who's overseeing the reviews, and they've done quite a bit of work, which we talked about earlier, about safe sleeping and about men in children's lives and non-accidental injury in babies. So that's just a sort of reference to that. Just so you know that the national panel is today going to announce, I think, 3 national reviews. I should have been there this morning, actually, Liz. I probably should do it. It will save the journey, wouldn't it? But they're going to do one on child sexual abuse, one on neglect. I can't remember what the third one is. So we're in quite a time of change, some national things going on. So there's some references here. I would really recommend you looking at these resources. And I've also added in a quite sort of old document. I think it's, I can't remember what date it is, 2012 I think. It's called All Babies Count. It's on the NSBCC website. And it's a really helpful document for helping us kind of think about, in more detail than I can give you today, about sort of vulnerability factors and how they influence parenting and babies. So what is the harm that we are seeing to babies? And this is, I think we had a helpful warning about it earlier. We've probably got a lot of parents here, and I don't know if any of you had family who've been impacted by babies who have ill health or have died. So remembering that that can be quite painful, and talking about harm to babies who are most vulnerable is I'm really mindful of. But the first kind of harm that we're seeing, and most reviews aren't covering this in very much detail, is the harm that happens to baby antenatally. So I'm going to talk about that. Darian knows my absolute obsession is babies in the womb. She knows also the reason my obsession is because I'm a triplet, and I just, I started my life with other people, so I think that must have influence. Why I think about that? What was that like with 3 of us in there? What was going on? So it's really, really important that we are thinking antenatally as well as postnatally. So that's the first time. We'll turn that on safe sleeping, and I'm not going to talk much about that. Quite a lot of reviews with a lot of harm, either kind of serious injury or death, comes from preventable accidents. I'm doing far too many reviews where accidents were seen as accidental. It happened. Accidents happen. Rather than they were things that could have been prevented and we could have done something about. There is actually a really good leaflet about preventing accidents that is, I think, quite useful to have, and I think it very much links to the work we're doing on the unsafe sleeping. So doing some accident prevention work when you are coming across any accidents in the context of neglect is really, really important. I reviewed lots of babies who either died or were seriously harmed, and they have had many, many accidents before there's this critical incident that happened. We're also seeing non-fatal physical abuse, we're seeing non-fatal neglect. Neglect is a huge thing for babies, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that as we go along, but really thinking about babies' needs are really important. Obviously, non-accidental head injury is one of the biggest categories, and linked very much to some of the work you're doing about sleeping, but also about crying, and actually how we can respond to that. And particularly thinking about men here, men as fathers, men as partners, with histories of concern who may not have had any advice, might have turned up to any of the appointments, won't be targeted very much about understanding the needs of babies. I think it was in Leicestershire that I did a review. I was about it on the train actually, but it's been billions of years ago, billions, where with Chris Tune, lovely Chris Tune, and because I'm just thinking about him picking up from the train station. But a baby died, and the father was responsible, and he was 17, and I went and visited him in prison. And he took complete responsibility for what happened. It's unusual, I have to say, but he did. And he said to me that he just didn't know. He was taking drugs, and he was fighting with his partner, and money was short. And he really just didn't know what to do about this baby that kept crying all the time. So thinking about that is really thinking about men. And I know this one at the bottom is really hard to talk about, but we are seeing. So I did a review last year for the national panel, looking at all the rapid reviews, 144 rapid reviews, all the 50 published reviews around intrafamilial child sexual abuse. Slightly weird because I reviewed 50 reviews, 9 of them were mine, so it's a little bit like marking your own homework, isn't it? I wasn't doing quality, I was just thinking about lessons. But there's a huge cohort of children who are becoming pregnant as a result of sexual abuse, having babies at the age of 10, 11 or 12, and then thinking about that baby and how we plan for that baby and how we help the child who has had a child. And I just started a review yesterday, I was saying to Amanda, talking about that. So these are all the kind of things that we're having to think about. It's really difficult because it's a workforce. It gives us a lot to address, doesn't it? It gives us a lot of agendas to deal with. Yes, thank you. So what do we know about vulnerability? This comes from all those kind of reviews of serious case reviews, but also the national panel's national annual review. And we know that babies who are more vulnerable are those who are born prematurely, and I've done lots and lots of reviews around premature babies, and actually understanding what the risk is for premature babies. I'm a social worker, I don't have a health background, so these are things that are not going to come naturally to me. And so whenever I do a review, I have the privilege and opportunity to sort of learn something new, and so having done quite a few premature baby reviews, kind of realise all the things I didn't know about premature babies, how to care for them, what's it going to be like when they come home. And then we're going to add vulnerability of parents and kind of thinking about that. Babies born as part of multiple birth or who also have siblings under the age of 2 are a vulnerable group. Babies born with disabilities, chronic health conditions, complex health needs or learning difficulties. I think it's really, really important. There's a couple of, I should have put them in red, shouldn't I, the ones that I added on my own, that aren't in the literature. So I've just added a few in. Babies born through coercion, control and domestic violence, I think are a huge risk factor, but they're not appearing in the literature for some reason. It's maybe not coming through reviews, maybe as reviewers we're not picking up enough, but it's a real factor. And we know that babies whose siblings have previously been subject to proceedings or child protection plans are also more vulnerable, and we know we have a capacity of kindness and empathy as professionals that we do take to do this part again syndrome, don't we? The next baby will be okay, and not learning the lessons from the past to go into the future. So it's not been recognised in these reviews that there might be additional things that need to be put in place to help parents cope, whether that's early help, child in need, child protection, wherever we are in the process, thinking in our early health assessments or any assessments that we're doing, what are the vulnerabilities and how do we make sense of them? So what do we know about parents? What are the kind of vulnerabilities of parents? So we know that parents are vulnerable when they've had adverse childhood experiences, I'm sure you know a lot about that. Substance misuse problems, including cannabis. We've all become a little bit too calm about cannabis. That's a bit of literature, isn't it? Calm about cannabis. Keep calm and don't be calm about cannabis, could be the catchphrase. It's clear in all my reviews everywhere that we're not. So I'm doing the Alfred Steele review, which is the boy whose parents and her partner were sentenced to over 25 years in jail just because of the kind of seriousness of the injuries to these children. And cannabis was constantly a concern. Everyone was saying, don't smoke cannabis. And every time people went to the home, people were smoking cannabis. So not taking it seriously is really important. So we know that parents who are either subject to domestic abuse or are perpetrators of domestic abuse, there are concerns. We know parents with disabilities and learning difficulties. And here in Leicestershire, again, a million years ago, we've done a couple of reviews, haven't we, around parents with learning disabilities. Having babies with the vulnerabilities of the previous slide showed to you, and not having a real sense of how to care for those babies. So thinking about what we do about that. And so young parents do, I always feel a bit sad that young parents are overrepresented in this group, but they are in our reviews. Because young parents, they tell us, and they are right, that they can be good parents, but they may need additional support. And of course the saddest one is care experience, as we've already said. I was saying you need a passport or something, you need something to kind of help parents through the kind of first time and second time with their parents, to really think how can we help them to be parents. One of the things that's coming up in my review, so this is one of mine, is families where there are large numbers of children, and those children are born in very quick succession. Almost mum's pregnant, she has the baby, she's pregnant again, she has the baby. I've got one where I had 7 children, and 2 children were born in the same year, January, December. Or was it the other way around? Was it December? No, it can't be the other way around. But actually, not asking, what does that mean? Is this an issue of sexual violence and control? And what's the impact of that is really important. Yeah, thank you. A word about domestic abuse. So, Amanda and I were talking just about the number of reviews we're doing. I know we're supposed to be talking about babies, but we can't help thinking about the babies growing up and being in an even more complex world. And so we're doing a lot of reviews around young people involved in violence, knife crime, gun crime, and dying or killing other children. And domestic abuse and violence must be at the heart of this, alongside physical abuse, which we started to call physical chastisement for some reason, unbeknown to me. And so domestic abuse we have to get right. Now the domestic abuse legislation came in 2021. It made absolutely clear, didn't it, that domestic abuse is perpetrated by one person, or occasionally a family group, over another person. And we can talk about the coercion, control, and violence, and financial, and all of that. But what we need to be clear is that there is a perpetrator and there is a victim survivor. And they need to be talked about differently and separately if we're going to create change. Because they are not going to be parenting a baby in the same way together if one person is coercing and controlling and the other one is being coerced and controlled. And so for that reason, I'm eradicating. You may think this is very bold to take over the world on this matter, but I'm eradicating 3 phrases. The first one is domestic abuse in the family. What's wrong with that? I was thinking when I read that, I'm not an overly emotional person, but I do a lot of reviews and I read a lot of records, but I would say, without being overly dramatic, every time I read these 3 phrases in records, a little splinter of glass goes into my heart. That's genuinely true, because I think about the implications of it. So, domestic abuse in the family. A suggests the toddlers have it, with their black battle. Everybody's going around being violent to each other. It kind of suggests it's just something that happens, and it doesn't tell you who the perpetrator is. And my God, if you were experiencing the levels of violence and coercion and control that some women are experiencing, because largely in our world it's women, largely, and you read it's in the family, then you would not say. The second phrase is domestic abuse between the couple, the within between. And the third one, which I think is my most and least favourite, is a domestic violence relationship. What's wrong with that? I think more than that. I think we connect domestic violence and relationships together. So what perpetrators will say is all relationships go through a little bit of rough and tumble. And we'll try and normalise it, won't they? That this is what happens in relationships. And then we replicate it by talking about it as if it's a relationship. So I'm encouraging you to kind of both change it. I mean, if I had my way, I say this, I'd go and break into all the local authority offices and change all the records. There's probably a kind of cut and paste, isn't there, that you could do across all the files. I quite like the idea of that. So you hear in messages you have the domestic abuse toolkit, and that's really helpful. It uses the Johnson typologies. I'm not going to go into that. But think about how we talk about domestic abuse so that we're really clear. So I was thinking when you were talking about safe sleeping, I was thinking where does coercion and control fit and sit with that? And how do we help women who are being coerced? Because they often are being controlled to do things that they really shouldn't be doing. And how can we help them? Tell us about that? Thank you, Liz. So I'm going to start with the, and I probably need to speak up, don't I, Liz? I'm going to start with the unborn baby. And because it's the foundation for future development, it's the start of the relationship between the baby and the parent in a reciprocal way. It's the start for the parent to make sense of the baby. I think I won't kind of labour this too much, that's probably an unfortunate phrase, but it's really important for us to think of the womb as baby's first home. And that baby needs to be in a home that feels safe, stress-free, joyous, calm, comfortable. And we don't always think about this being baby's first home. What's life like for a young-born baby at this time? Now, I was telling my youngest daughter, who's 20, that I was coming to do this, and she's saying, Mum, I hope you're not being pro-choice in this, because I was talking about the needs of babies. And I'm not. I'm just saying when people decide to have a baby and go forward with a baby, we need to help them think about how to keep that baby safe. And much as the messages that we got from the safe sleeping, that's not about kind of telling people off, but it's about connecting it to love and care for the baby. One of the things I've really, really noticed in all the work that we do is that, and I'm sure I've done this myself, so as a social worker, I'm absolutely certain I do this myself, but we quite often say to people, families, if things aren't going very well, the next thing that will happen is you will get a social worker. I always have this idea of sort of being that nice Jane Wiffin is a threat to come round to your house. It's that nice Jane Wiffin round. And when we've got the nice Jane Wiffin, the next thing is, we're going to have an early help plan, or it's going to step up to child in need, or maybe child protection. A, it's a threat, but B, it doesn't really make much sense to people because it's a process. Actually, what we mean is, if you don't do this, if you don't put a baby in safe sleeping, something bad is going to happen to that baby, and you don't want that to happen. It's not about the process. And so it's the same here, that we're not kind of telling you off, we're saying it as a demonstration of love and reciprocity of love, we need to think about how to keep babies home safe. So all these things, as you saw, babies are impacted by all these things. They're impacted by alcohol, they're impacted by smoking. I was happy to see your emphasis on smoking, because that's another thing that we can underestimate in terms of the impact on the unborn baby. Domestic abuse and violence, and stress and mental health. Now, parents and mothers can't help their mental health needs, and they can't help the stress, but we can support them to address that. All of these things will have an impact on the unborn baby. Thank you. And, I did a presentation last year, which I think is still on your YouTube channel. So if you want to look a bit more at the evidence base around the kind of immediate short-term, long-term impact of these on babies, I'm not going to say too much about it here, but just to say that one of the things is that this is sort of none of the matter really, is that these babies who are impacted by drugs or alcohol or smoking, we have a higher risk of miscarriage, we have a higher risk of stillbirth, we have a higher risk of carrying prematurity, an impact on labour, more traumatic labour, with then more traumatic We had neonatal abstinence syndrome. That's something, the last review I did here, no, not the last, but one review, which Michael will know about. It was a baby born with neonatal abstinence syndrome and how to manage that baby when that baby goes home, all the different carers and how do they deal with that. And we've got low birth weight, we've got poor feeding, brain damage, and I've got how the mother feels about the baby. Because mums who take drugs and alcohol and smoke feel very guilty. So the kind of baby can be a little bit of a reminder of that, and we've already sort of broken up a kind of connection. And these are all the things that we're going to impact in the first year and the ability to be able to parent. I suppose I've already talked about this, but just being empathetic to parents, but baby-centred at the same time. Let's get that balance right. I'm not going to say too much about this, but just one of the things that we can really help parents in this sort of, in the antenatal period is that we can help them to fall in love with their babies. So vulnerable parents don't often go to antenatal classes. They don't always have family advice. They don't always have friends' advice to talk about becoming baby. And we can often have professionals who themselves may not be pregnant, and so that kind of advice about talking to babies, smiling, playing music, all those things, to kind of have that reflective functioning. And what we're looking here for is to start this thing of reflective functioning early on. So reflective functioning is just being able to recognise the needs of your baby. It's just a fancy, really fancy way of saying that, which is when the baby cries, when the baby kicks me in the womb, isn't that wonderful? Poor reflective functioning. Why is the baby doing that? That baby's already hurting me. How do we help people move from that place to another, so that when the baby's born, the parent is thinking, the baby, I'm tired, the baby's hungry, I need to feed the baby. Not, I'm tired, the baby's hungry. She always does it to me when I'm tired. She always cries. She does it deliberately to get at me. Those kind of lack of reflective functioning, understanding the place of the baby in the relationship, really impact on parenting and what we need to do. And what we know from the evidence base, and it's in the slides, but I won't go through it, is just if we can increase reflective functioning antenatally, attachment is improved in the first year of life. And there's very, very, very good evidence of that. And I don't know that it's not something we always think about, but we keep going. I'm going to go further on. I think there's some really good 2 bits of work, which I don't know if I'll go through in great detail, but some really good bits of work from something called Birth Companions, who are an organisation who support vulnerable mothers. They started off by supporting women in prison antenatally, but they've broadened them, and they've done a birth charter. So that's a really helpful bit of work, and the Nuffield Observatory have also done a birth charter, which is what should we do in these circumstances where we've got vulnerable parent, we've got vulnerable baby, we've got concerns about the context in which the pregnancy is happening. And what's really important is that we have really good sensitive pre-birth assessment processes, and I know that you're doing work on that here, but really that the pre-birth assessment process includes stuff about reflective functioning, because that's the thing I notice is often missing, the kind of emotional, relational stuff. That we have focus on trauma and trauma-informed approach, that we have quick referrals. We still have this thing of referring after 20 weeks. It's too late. It is just too late. And I know that's a service issue, but and thinking about the viabilities of pregnancies, but at 20 weeks, you can't get everything done. You can't build a relationship with a vulnerable parent. That baby's going to be born early. You know that if the parent's been drinking or using drugs, they're going to be here quicker than you can say flash. So we need to start early so that we can have early engagement, and then we need kind of specialist support with continuity of relationships built in. Vulnerable parents with difficult lives need to have the same person around them to kind of build that trusting up relationship. And we're kind of doing a bit of modelling there, I think, which is so important. I love this, this systems map. One of the recommendations on the Birth Charter is that we make a systems map for vulnerable parents, which says who's involved, how to connect, what they're going to do, what their role is in your life, and to do it almost as an eco map, making sure people put contact numbers on it and they keep it up to date. So that's kind of what helps in this period of time. Part of the plan should be a kind of communication plan as well, thinking about the best way to communicate. So thinking about the impact of trauma. So we know that children who lived in traumatic circumstances have kind of flight, fight, freeze, and that will be true of these parents. So kind of noticing that, so they're either running out of meetings, not coming to meetings, or just not listening. I had one of my triplet sisters had very long-term mental health problems actually, and I used to spend a lot of time going to meetings with her. And I've been a social worker for about 5 years or so, and I went to a meeting with her. It's like many years ago, and it was about a 3.5-hour meeting. And we came out, and I said to Fiona, "How did that go?" And she said, "Fantastic, really went well." And I said, "Well, what did you think about what they said?" She said, "Oh, I didn't listen to anything they said. 2 goals. Stay in the meeting, don't cry. Cheat, tick." And I was shocked to my core. I have to say, genuinely, I was shocked to my core. Because I'm sitting there as a professional social worker thinking, there's all making sense, I'm taking it all in. Don't cry, don't leave the meeting. So thinking about, that's been one of the things that stayed with me, and I share that with you. So thinking about communication, so thinking about comprehension, particularly given gaps in education, thinking about literacy, learning disability. Obviously, we've so wrecked that problem in terms of, there's some really fantastic guides to communicating to parents who have a learning disability. I know none of you got any time, but if you're working with a parent with a learning disability and you don't know the top 10 rules, then go and find them. Because you're just going to waste a lot of time, your time, their time, without that. And then thinking about the use of interpreters. And of course, interpreters are really important, but they have to be briefed. So what we do is we often ask interpreters to come, and we don't really tell them what we're going to be talking about, and we don't tell them about sensitive subjects, and we don't tell them that if there's a word we're using that's not in their language, that they need to tell us about that, and that they don't need to be sensitive and think about the person they're interpreting feelings. I mean, they do need to think about it, but quite often we know that interpreters don't feel comfortable saying difficult things, and remembering that parents may have very good English as a second language, usually better than our understanding of their language. But I did a review for a little girl who said, "Jane, everyone can talk to me, but when I talk in English, but my heart speaks in patois. And when I'm talking about things at the heart, I need the patois, not the English." Again, these things stay with you. They so you make you think, how do we talk about difficult things? I just finished a review for 2 little tiny babies who were so seriously harmed, for someone from Eastern European, Slovakian, and complicated. So everybody said that this woman had English as a second language, but she could only understand enough. But the complicated matters they tried to talk to her about, they're thinking about, will she be able to comprehend that? Really important. Yeah, can we keep going? So that's kind of pre-birth. We're going to just move very quickly on to think about what the reviews tell us about babies who are harmed in the first year. I think a lot of it comes from the antenatal period, and that's why I spent quite a lot of time on that, because I think we can see it coming. But yeah. So I think many reviews tell us that we're not as baby focused as we can be, and I have this whole thing about modelling good practice. So going into family homes and saying hello to the baby, and smiling at the baby, and cooing at the baby, and asking how the baby is. And actually, the fact that the baby is asleep, so many police reports where they say the baby or child is asleep, nobody knows what that baby's like. So interact with babies. Not as a kind of forensic thing, but actually as a modelling thing, you're showing how to be with babies. Think about the baby's journey antenatally and what that might mean for them and what that might mean for parenting. I kind of put in about a checklist around safe sleeping, but you've answered that question for me. You have a checklist. You've got something you can take into people's homes. So thank you. Yeah. So thinking about family circumstances, what we know for these babies in the first year, there was a real lack of recognition of the seriousness of signs and indicators of neglect. And I'm kind of somewhat reluctant to say that a baby who has constant nappy rash is in constant pain and will constantly not be able to sleep. So I see reports where people say the baby had nappy rash. The last one review I did was down to the knees, and people talked about the baby being uncomfortable. That's like, everybody here has cystitis. And someone said she gets a little bit uncomfortable. Would you be as friendly as this too? I don't think so. I just did a review where somebody wrote, these are all lovely people, I'm not being critical, I'm just trying to reflect on things. But I did a review where somebody put, this 8-year-old had all her teeth removed. And in the report it said that she had dental hygiene issues. I said, I had great dental hygiene issues. Losing the teeth, being at 8 years old, the whole lot of them, I think is a little bit more serious. We're being euphemistic to be kind. It comes from kindness, because we don't hurt people's feelings, but then nobody knows the seriousness of it. So we have the description, low-level neglect, my pet hate. What does that mean? Low-level neglect, what does it mean for that baby? Because it may not feel. We use the phrase good enough parenting. What does that mean for this baby today? And we talked about, we have justifications. We all have our own standards. It's a premature baby. It's going to be difficult to care for. It's a baby with a disability or health needs. It's going to be difficult. And we find ourselves justifying why the care the baby's provided with is not quite optimum. And what we do is we reinforce that the baby is the problem, not the parent needs to change. So we just need to think about that, because that's the style of child blame. Thank you. And really important when we think about family circumstances, so really key to think about the cultural context of parenting. And there is no sort of blueprint for how anybody parents or the cultural context of parenting. So there's no manual for that, so we have to ask people, are you using cultural grounds here? So cultural grounds is really, really important. I've got an example of one behind me, but where do people get cultural ground if people haven't got access to it? Do you have a template? Okay, great. Well, thinking about that, we need to think about the ethical response to domestic abuse that I've already talked about, and really important about talking about depression. Depression in fathers is emerging as a really, really massive issue that we're not quite kind of getting to grips with. So I'm going to do a very quick exercise about capacity to change, and then I might just have a couple more minutes, Liz, to say things. So has everybody got a bit of paper in front of them? If you haven't got a bit of paper, you're just going to have to do this in your head. Just in your head. I want you to, those of you with paper, to do 4 columns. And if you haven't got the paper, you're going to have to think of it. So in the first column, I want you to write something. In the first column, I want you to write something or think about something you do. Actually, it's 5 columns. Something you do that you like to do, but you know you shouldn't because it's not very good for you. So there's a prism of something when you ask that question. Something you do that you like doing, but you know it's not very good for you, you shouldn't do it. We already had a conversation about sausage wraps on this table already. And I'm going to ask somebody to go through this, so bear that in mind. In the second column, I want you to write down, and you won't have to touch this in a few minutes, what needs does this thing you do but you shouldn't do need for you? What are the needs it needs? If you were doing this more seriously, you go superficial or too deep, you know, to Maslow's hierarchy. Okay? Everybody just quickly look at me a minute. I want all your attention. So, I'm telling you, you're not allowed to do it anymore. No, I'm serious, Jan. I'm serious. Put down on paper your immediate response when I tell you that. And be honest. I'm telling you, you're not allowed to do it anymore. Column 4 is James told you not to do it, so obviously you're not going to do it anymore, obviously. And so you're going to have to find something else. What are you going to replace that thing with? Now you have to remember, when you replace it, it has to meet the needs in column 2, because otherwise it won't work. And column, just for the interest of time, column 5 is this extra, this new thing you're going to do. Does it cost you any more money? Does it cost you any more time? Are there any sort of consequences? Okay, does someone want to take us through theirs?
So I thought that I drink alcohol, which I know is hard for me, but I do enjoy it. I find that it relaxes me, helps me to recover if I've had a bad day, it helps me to stay strong, forget things. When you told me I wasn't going to...
I just want to focus on the needs, because they're quite important, aren't they? It serves quite a purpose. I know it is, I know you. But it's quite, you know, it's quite sort of integral to kind of dealing with a difficult job and being pressurised and having a difficult time. So I want us to take the needs bit of this seriously.
When you said I couldn't do it anymore, I thought that I would probably still do it anyway.
And you thought, what a cat. How dare she? How dare she? Who's she? It's not James Wiffin. Exactly, what's going on? Remember that that's the self-talk. I talked about this over here, self-talk, what we say to when people are telling us one thing, we're thinking another. I've had so many reviews where people said, yeah, Jenny, I was listening to them, I wasn't listening, I was just sort of there, I was in my own head, something else going on. What are you replacing it with?
Well, I thought about replacing it with a non-alcoholic version. I genuinely believe that I probably wouldn't give it up anyway, in all honesty.
It does the non-alcoholic cost a bit more,
It
but
does
it's not as tasty.
It's not. I don't think I'd like it as much, and maybe it costs more. So yeah.
I hope you see the point of this, which is we talk to people about change all the time, and we don't think about what needs the thing we want to change is meeting, and if you don't think about the needs, you're not going to change, and if you're not, Jan.
I was going to say, in terms of, I mean, I don't think it's just the same seat, but it's how, it's not the leading up, we're not asking. I mean, obviously, you're drug and alcohol, because, you know, doing certain cessations, and that's different. It's about making that reasonable adjustment so that they can be charged as harm in their circumstances, rather than saying, we can't do that anymore. I'm not saying just continue to take it. So using the example Liz has given, Liz, for all those reasons you said, we all many of us agree, we identify those reasons. However, if you know that you're going to have to drive later on that day, you will do it because you made that adjustment. And that's what we are saying about the same seat talk. I'm not disagreeing with the same thing. It is about making that reasonable adjustment in the circumstances. It's putting the benefit first.
And I agree with you, because I think we also know the self-talk somehow talks people out of that. And I just think, I encourage people to use this with parents, to kind of just think about what's underlying some of the reluctance to change, because actually that's what we're seeing. And it's about how to have gentle conversations. And I think you can do it in a kind of fun, actual way. And it's really, really important. I'll take couple more minutes. I've got about 27 million slides, so don't mind. I'm not going to go there. There's all about change. I mean, I think just in terms of what the evidence base tells us, I think is that our postnatal services aren't including men as much as we want them to, and we need to change that. We know that's a systems issue, and we know coming up from all the serious case reviews is kind of sharing of information across computing systems, the kind of information that GPs hold and the threshold for when that information can be shared, particularly about men, is important. I wanted to say something about child in need, and I'm probably going to stop after that. It's just that one of the things that's emerging is kind of what's, I'll put you early help and then finish, is emerging as sort of another systems issue, is that our understanding of child in need processes. And again, I can remember the 1989 Children Act, and Section 17 of the Children Act is that child in need is a statutory process. I keep having people tell me it's not. I do keep thinking, didn't you have to get repealed and the time it took me to travel from here to there? Because people feel they can't enforce it somehow, but what it says is that this is recognising that a child has unmet needs, and without services, those needs will deteriorate. So this baby has unmet needs, and without those services, the baby's needs will bound to deteriorate, and neglect is bound to get worse. What we know about neglect particularly is that it never gets better. It doesn't get better on its own. What happens is that it gets more entrenched, more struggling, parenting patterns come in place. Babies and children are not helped to manage their crying and their behaviour, so parents start to think, my children are unmanageable, nobody can be expected to make parent this. And that's what I see all the time. I see time, years and years, pre-birth to 17-year-olds, kind of this constant downward spiral because it hasn't been addressed. And this child in need is just kind of think, what we're saying is that parents can refuse services that are designed to improve their children's circumstances. And I just think there's something we need to think about how we think about that, and what we can do about that. We also need to think about that child in needs are not being kind of prioritised by child protection plans, so a lot of the services are at this level for babies particularly, and that we aren't seeing multi-agency assessments. Assessments have become something that children's services do rather than that the multi-agency does together, and there is massive confusion about whether we can share assessments when they've been completed. And I can genuinely say to you, and maybe I'll put a stop on this point in the next 3 minutes to 12, is that I've done about 49 reviews of harmed children or deaf to babies, where if the assessment had been shared with a professional group, we would have been made a difference because they would have understood what's going on. The primary legislation for assessment does not say that you need to seek consent from parents to share information. It says it's best practice to do that, but it also says that if you're going forward with a plan, that the people involved in that plan need to see the assessment to make sense of what they need to do to protect that baby. I guess that's my final plea for you, is just to think about, we know what the vulnerabilities are, we know what the baby's vulnerabilities, we know what parents' vulnerabilities are, and our task is just trying to help make changes and kind of safeguard these children the best way, babies the best way we can. So thinking about kind of child in need, how do we make that better? Early help, massive confusion about step-down processes, who's the lead professionals, where can we share information? Babies, most of the work, babies are located, all the reviews, they're all located at that level, and we're seeing massive variability there. So thank you. Thanks.